the way the media and the powers that be and whatever have tried to manage media coverage of the Epstein case is have it be like a partisan thing. So basically, mainstream media, and I'm sure this will be the same line Congress takes, may only really talk about an Epstein-Clinton relationship after Clinton was no longer president.
Investigative journalist Whitney Webb points to Clinton's flights on Epstein's plane during the years he was building global initiatives like the Clinton Foundation, raising questions about the powerful circles intersecting around philanthropy, politics, and influence. Her conclusion hints at a bigger picture. The Epstein saga may be less about one man and more about a global network of influence that few people fully understand.
So that would be the well-known trips that Epstein and Clinton, that Clinton took on Epstein's plane, like the trip to Africa, the trip to Asia. These were pretty much entirely associated with Clinton setting up his post-presidential philanthropies, like the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton Health Access Initiative, and the Clinton Global Initiative, which Epstein's defense lawyers later claimed Epstein had a significant role in creating. And of course, the Clinton Foundation later on has ties to the Maxwell family. They inject $1 million plus into Ghislaine Maxwell's Terramar. Her nephew, Alexander Gerassi, works in the State Department under Hillary Clinton, and he had previously been a liaison between Isabel Maxwell's foundation and the Clinton Foundation. And Isabel Maxwell, of course, is Ghislaine's sister. So, who has a lot of ties to what she called her father's Rolodex. So her father being Robert Maxwell, like a pretty well-documented Israeli spy. And some of the figures in those Rolodex are figures like Ehud Barak and Shimon Peres, former prime ministers of Israel. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot of interesting overlap there as it relates to, you know, the Epstein-Clinton relationship. But I doubt they'll go down the Israel line because we're talking about, you know, U.S. Congress, and we're talking about the Trump administration, who are very affiliated with you know, the current Israeli government for sure. We may see some stuff about Ehud Barak come out in that, I don't know, because Ehud Barak was one of the people that pressured Clinton to pardon Mark Rich, for example, at the sort of around the as he was leaving the presidency, and then later, you know, not that long after, gets very publicly involved with Epstein, and also gets involved with Ron Burkle, who is probably best known for owning a bunch of supermarkets like Kroger, I believe, and he accompanied Clinton on one of these philanthropic development flights, but also ended up hiring Clinton not that long after that. And Burkle, of course, also has pretty significant ties to Diddy in the same period of time. And I think Michael Jackson as well. So a lot of, yeah, I know you think more people would talk about Ron Burkle, but they don't. It's strange. But anyway, this is all significant, I think, too, because I doubt there is going to be any serious discussion if the Clintons are brought to Congress to ask them about Epstein's 17 visits to the Clinton White House in the 90s. I doubt they will go there. And that's because one of the figures that that Epstein was most often meeting with was a man named Mark Middleton, who worked in the White House. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very clear that if he did take his own life, he definitely had help in doing so, if that is the case. But, you know, frankly, I don't think anyone really knows what happened. And I don't want to sit here and be a gatekeeper telling people he's dead, he's not dead. Most people accept he's dead, and so I tend to say that. And if new evidence is presented, I'll happily accommodate that. But I'm not going to dismiss people who say he's still alive because, frankly, nobody knows, and there's been a lot of obfuscation about what went on the night that he was reportedly found dead and all of this. And so, you know, if people want to speculate that, and given, you know, things like the intelligence ties, his ties to powerful people, and things like that, you know, it's certainly possible. But, you know, more often than not, I mean, cases, prominent people like Jeffrey Epstein that threaten, you know, powerful interests with spilling the beans on things. They don't want the beans, you know, they don't want the beans to be public, basically. You know, they can get off in prison even if they're under constant watch. We don't really know, again, what happened to Epstein, but, you know, generally in these types of cases, they do tend to get offed. if they threatened to spill the beans. And it seemed like Epstein may have been willing to do that. But then again, it depends on how important of an asset he may have been. And I think that remains to be seen. So I'm happy to keep, an open mind if new evidence is presented that supports that theory. But, for reasons I just explained and past precedent about similar cases, I tend to think he died. And I don't think he did it the way the official narrative says. But I would say that he definitely had help if he did himself, and that there's obviously, I think, something about his death that they don't really want to come out. And I think, it would be embarrassing too, in a sense, for the current administration, because of course it was the first Trump administration when all of this happened. So it was the William Barr-led Department of Justice that technically has responsibility for whatever happened to Epstein in prison. Yeah, so I don't think Israel needs to blackmail Donald Trump. Why? Because Donald Trump wouldn't exist as a business or political figure if he hadn't. And the Rothschild family has longstanding ties to the Israeli state, and also to, the popularism in the early 20th century and slightly before then. So, he really owes that bank a lot. And Wilbur Ross, who was the banker working for N.M. Rothschild at the time Trump was bailed out, was rewarded by Trump as being his first Secretary of Commerce. Even though Wilbur Ross was at that point, he still is geriatric, but he was geriatric at that point too, and was falling asleep in meetings and things like that. And it's not like he was doing a good job, right? So I was widely seen as being a favor for having helped bail Trump out in the early 90s. Kimball Musk, his brother, who's on the board of Tesla and SpaceX, was introduced to a member of Epstein's entourage who had dated Epstein and lived at the apartments on 301 66th Street East. A girl from there starts dating Kimball Musk, and somehow Epstein is allegedly granted access to SpaceX facilities and tours. So for example, he'll be a lot of people like to bring up the picture of him and Ghislaine Maxwell from 2014. He'll say he was photobombed and all of this. I see Elon Musk as a person who has a very specific persona he wants to project to the public, and then there's business Musk, right? And I don't think they're necessarily always the same person. So, for example, Elon Musk, a lot of people maybe forget, he's a big military contractor. And also, the Space Force, that's also an intelligence agency. So he's technically a military and intelligence contractor. In order to keep your contracting business with those things, there's certain rules you have to play by, and certain things I would assume you can and can't say, or you'll lose those lucrative contracts. And if you look at someone like Elon Musk and his business history, a lot of his companies would not have been successful, would not have been successful without significant subsidies from the government. So, I feel like in order to get those deals, there's certain rules you have to abide by to an extent, at least when it comes to your business decisions and certain things, right? So maybe he wants to project, this persona of I'm one of the bros, I'm one of the guys, I believe in free speech and all of this. And certainly when he bought Twitter, that's what he said. But then it became, free speech, but not freedom of reach. And now it's sort of changing again with the appointment of this new CEO. And again, I don't really have any high hopes, and I didn't necessarily when Musk bought Twitter, just because I tend to be kind of skeptical, and I guess you could probably say cynical about these types of people. And, I personally, just from my own, experience with Epstein research, I have found Musk not to be very upfront about some of those connections there. So, for example, he'll be a lot of people like to bring up the picture of him and Ghislaine Maxwell from 2014. He'll say he was photobombed and all of this. But, he won't bring up the fact, well, at least reporters seem to have forgotten, that Kimball Musk, his brother, who's on the board of Tesla and SpaceX, was introduced to a member of Epstein's entourage who had dated Epstein and lived at the apartments on 301 66th Street East, where all these traffic girls lived. A girl from there starts dating Kimball Musk, and somehow Epstein is allegedly granted access to SpaceX facilities and tours, and then is allegedly advising Tesla, according to the New York Times reporter James Stewart, who was told by someone else that Epstein was advising Tesla, and then goes before Epstein's 2019 arrest and most of his public infamy, goes and asks him about if the rumors were true. And Epstein says yes. And this is during a time when Musk is saying he's trying to secure capital to take Tesla private, I believe. And this was allegedly involving one of the Saudi wealth funds of the Saudi government. And at that time, Epstein was a very, very close advisor to Mohammed bin Salman, who had recently come to power. And if you remember back to when the Epstein story the scandal sort of broke in 2019, it wasn't just talking about his townhouse having all these pictures of him and Clinton. There were a lot, probably as much as Clinton, of Epstein with MBS. Yes, but Mohammed bin Salman was brought to power in a way that was very uncharacteristic for Saudi Arabia. There it's not father to son hierarchy. Right? It's like seniority within the royal family. Usually it's like elderly uncles that become the next crown prince and whatnot. And he was very young in his 30s when he came to power. And he hammered out things like the Abraham Accords with people like Jared Kushner. He was texting Jared Kushner all the time, who, of course, has a very close relationship with the Netanyahu family, for example. So, again, that seems rather uncharacteristic as well. And it's very possible that, given the geopolitical plays in the Middle East and North Africa, a lot of that often has to do with, people that are either for or against Israel. What government's going to shifting the balance of power there, normalizing relationships with Israel. And so the Abraham Accords obviously were a huge step towards normalizing the relationship with Israel in the region. And they may have seen there's this upstart prince that's really ambitious, and if we can get him in, then maybe he'll help us push that normalization just a bit further. So, there's a lot of question marks there, but it seems to me that may have been something to do with it. And I also think this might be the thread to pull on to find out the real reason Epstein was arrested in 2019. Because if you think about who MBS took out, Mohammed bin Nayef, that guy was very, very close to John Brennan, who was the CIA director. And John Brennan was very unhappy with MBS's rise to power. And if you have Epstein close to MBS, John Brennan, who's also a big guy behind Russiagate and all of this stuff, and around MBS, you have Kushner, right? You have Epstein. It seems like there's two intelligence-linked factions sort of duking it out. And if Epstein was on one side and the other side sort of wanted to send a message to that side. So anyway, you have sort of those shared connections and the Kimball Musk thing. And then you have a woman named Nicole Junkerman that I wrote a lot about in the book, who has invested in recent years very extensively in SpaceX. And Nicole Junkerman, maybe I should backtrack a little bit before getting to Nicole. So basically, what I note in my book is that there's the sex trafficking operation of Epstein everyone knows about, but there seems to have been another parallel operation that he used for influence ops, I guess you could say, involving women, but they were of age. They were women that were well educated in some cases, and probably most of the cases, but at least a few cases we know about, Epstein financed their graduate education and helped connect them. They ended up marrying or dating powerful people sort of in his circle. Take Elon Musk and Twitter, for example. What does Elon Musk want to do with Twitter? He wants to make it X, the everything app. And he specifically, as a model for that, refers to WeChat. Right? And a lot of people don't really like WeChat, at least in the US, because it has so much data about everything you do. And if data is the new oil, as is often being said, whoever owns the everything app is going to own most of the data. They're going to be the new oil barons, the data barons of this era, the new Rockefellers.
There's no question about
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So WeChat, the same parent company of WeChat, is a major investor in Tesla and their most active shareholders. So it's kind of weird a little bit.
Chinese company?
Would think. Yeah. So I think it would be, why does he want to replicate the same thing? No, the parent company of WeChat, I think it's Tencent, if I'm not mistaken.
In Tesla.
And he wants to bring WeChat here, right? I personally, if you're against the WEF, sort of like, Musk postures about being against the WEF, and they're all about this type of, digital
WEF
ID.
being World Economic Forum.
World Economic Forum. But it's not just exclusive to them, right? There's a lot of other interested parties, including Bill Gates, for example, a big force behind ID 2020 and all of that. A lot of this particular network's very interested in creating sort of this everything app, because everything you do, finances, social media, all of it is in one centralized place, and you get all that that data. Public-private partnership that was overseen, it was created under the aegis of or the auspices of the United Nations, and I think it's the Rockefeller Foundation, and it's some other nonprofits that were created by the Gates Foundation, like Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. But Bill Gates is a big proponent of this whole digital ID paradigm, for sure. Yeah. But I mean, the benefit of it, if you're one of these guys, you get all the data and you can sell it to security agencies, you can sell it to whoever, right? Because if data is the new oil, that's the way to make money. So you get everyone's data on that app. That's one thing. But at the same time, keep in mind, too, Musk is a military and intelligence contractor. And historically, if you look at the ambitions of the national security agencies as it relates to mass surveillance, they have wanted a thing like that for a very long time. Have everyone's data in one place. We can know exactly what they're doing at all times. And then also there's this interest on their part as well of using AI to predict what will happen, sort of this pre-crime paradigm in a sense. It's been being piloted, or has been piloted in the past, by companies like Palantir, Peter Thiel, who did PayPal with Musk, right? The predictive policing. And actually, William Barr under Trump created a pre-crime program in the United States called DEEP under the Department of Justice that has arrested some people for their social media posts and stuff like that. Under the guise that they're preventing before they happen. Well, that was at the time. That was the big concern at the time, right? Free slope. And is when you give those rights away to the government, you're not going to get them back.
If you enjoyed today's video on Anonymous Official, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thanks for watching and sticking with us.